seconds.
No problem.
Good morning, everybody who is just joining. For those of you who've been here before, you know the spiel, but for those of you who haven't, just give us a minute. We're going to let everybody filter in, and then we'll get started in about 30 seconds or so. So just bear with us for a minute whilst everybody's filtering in. All right, it's 10:01. I'm going to get started just because we have a lot of content to cover today. Sue, who is our guest presenter today, is also a SCORE volunteer with SCORE Monmouth, which is the chapter that we represent. She actually has put together a great presentation on house flipping. And Sue's background is she's actually an environmental engineer, but over the past couple of decades, I think, actually, Sue and her husband have had a side business of investing in properties and renovating properties and flipping houses, etc. I don't want to steal her thunder, so I'll let her talk about that herself a little bit. A couple of quick housekeeping things. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channels at some point in the next couple of days. We will send a copy of this presentation out to the attendees as well within the next couple of days. Just bear with us. And if you have questions, we're going to save the questions today until the end of the webinar, but please go ahead and put them in the Q&A function as you think of them, and we'll get to them at the end. Don't worry about if we don't get to them in the middle of the webinar, we will get to them at the end. So just put them in the Q&A function. And I think for now, that's my spiel. And I'm going to hand over to Sue.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to share my screen. I hope everybody can see it. Happy New Year to everybody and welcome. Just a minute, I got something on my screen here. Okay, good to go. I'm sure you're all aware of this very poor year that we're leaving behind us, and I'm hoping for a better one ahead. But one of the upsides of the pandemic, if there is one, is that the real estate market has been very hot. And prices are up about 25% as people are fleeing cities, looking for bigger spaces in which they could work at home. And so, of course, it seems like, hey, this would be a good time to jump on the bandwagon and, see what we could do about renovating and reselling properties and taking advantage of this hot market. Seems pretty simple. Buy a property at a low cost, hire a good contractor, fix it up quickly, cheaply, and sell it at a tidy process. Sure, but let me warn you, it's not as easy as it looks. I'm sure you've seen all the shows on TV. You got Chip and Joanna Gaines on DIY. They're doing fixer-uppers. You've got Property Brothers on HGTV. They've got several shows about renovating. You got Norma Abrams on This Old House. They all make it look so easy. But what you have to remember is these people are professionals. They've done dozens, if not hundreds of these, and I'm sure that they've made plenty of mistakes along the way, especially at the beginning, and they've learned from their mistakes. So that's really the purpose of this seminar, is to avoid the mistakes. So let's see what our agenda is. We want to talk about why we should be investing in a flip. Most importantly, avoiding the pitfalls. We want to choose the right property, obtain funding, do construction, and we'll learn some tips on how to get it sold. So let's get started. Why invest in a flip? Well, one of the things we have to realize is that buyers really don't want to do renovations themselves. They want to walk in, move in, and have it ready for them. And they don't want to go through all the work and aggravation that renovations can involve. For you, you get the satisfaction of turning an ugly duckling property into a swan, making it beautiful, being proud of it. But most important for all of us is we want the potential to earn a sizable profit. And if we can do it in 3 to 6 months, that's even better. The most important thing I want to tell you today is we have to watch out for the costly pitfalls. I'm going to be spending most of the time on these pitfalls. I'm going to go through the slides quickly, and then at the end we'll have time for questions. Here are some of the most important pitfalls. One is picking the wrong property. We're going to learn how not to do that. Defects in a property can cost a lot of money to fix. You don't want to build a white elephant. And by this, I mean build a property out of proportion with its neighbors, out of proportion with comparables, so that it doesn't get sold. Escalating construction costs can cause problems, and so can delays. They can cause us to run out of funds. And we could also have difficulty selling the renovated home. So these are the pitfalls we want to watch out for. Let's talk about picking the right property. I'm sure you've heard the expression, real estate is all about location, location, and location, the three most important things. Well, that's true. You want to pick a property that's in a good neighborhood. By this, I mean an area that's appreciating, or an area that's undergoing urban renewal, something where it's on an upswing. You want the property to have some kind of special features. Does it have a nice view? Does it have a large piece of land? Is it next to a park or recreational facilities? Is it commutable? Another thing to remember is a property that is undervalued. That would also be a very good pick, where it's sitting there much lower price than the neighbors because it needs work. So that would be something we want to focus on. Most importantly, it needs cosmetic renovation and update as opposed to heavy structural work. We want to stay away from properties that need a lot of structural work. It could be financially distressed. The seller needs to sell, is going to be foreclosed on, or it's something called list pendants, which there are lists published of these list pendants, which banks have already announced that they are going to start foreclosure proceedings, but the seller is still allowed to sell under those circumstances. And another thing to focus on would be a property that has excessive days on the market. You can see this on the listings where they're greater than 90 days on market. You can be sure that the seller is getting anxious. So those are how we start to pick the right properties. We want a property that has no, what we would call fatal flaws. These are the flaws we're going to go over in a few minutes. Structural flaws, hazardous materials, damage from termites or other vermin, water quality being a problem, and a septic system failing if it is a private residence on a septic system. How do we get to the bottom of it? Well, we need to do a lot of inspections in order to pick this property. Engineering inspections, hazmat inspections, look for lead and asbestos, look for termites, carpenter ants. We want to look at the water quality, the septic system, and test for radon. Structural inspections, we should hire a professional inspection company. There are many on the market. Here's what they do. So they look at the overall condition of the property, the roof of the house. How old is it? How many layers does it have? If it has more than 3 layers, it needs to be completely replaced. Ceiling and drywall leaks. You can see evidence of these on the walls by stains. Is the basement dry? Is there good drainage? The integrity of the windows and doors. Do they need weather stripping and sealing? The condition of the equipment in the house or the apartment. Air conditioning, furnace, water heater. These are expensive items. And are all the appliances in working condition? Once done, you will get a professional inspection report, and you can use those to negotiate with the seller for improvements or for credits. If you're buying a house, you might have to do a site assessment. First thing you should do is check for the history of ownership and use. If it was near a gas station or other industrial properties, you may have to do soil tests. If you're borrowing from a bank, the bank may require this. If the house had oil tanks and they're abandoned, they have to be abandoned or closed up in a certain way. You have to make sure of that. And you may have to do a type 1 site assessment, where you would be testing some soils to see if there are any contaminated materials. So you have to be careful of that, and that costs money. Another thing to look for would be lead and asbestos. Lead paint can be present for properties that were built before 1978. After that, you don't have to worry about it. That material was taken off the market. Lead can cause brain damage to children if they ingest the little flakes of lead that you see coming off the side of the wall there. And you can also cause a lot of lead dust in construction. Asbestos could be in the ceilings, could be in the insulation, as you can see in the picture, for properties that are constructed prior to 1989. Asbestos can cause lung damage, and it's not dangerous if it's not disturbed. So in some cases, if you're building over it, you can leave it in place and build over it undisturbed. But you may have to do some remediation during construction, and that is also costly. So it's a reason to do an inspection for those items. If you're buying a house that has a private well, you need to test it to make sure that it's not contaminated. There's a whole slew of tests that you can find out more information from lab companies, but these are the basics. You want to look for herbicides, volatile organics, nitrates, and bacteria. And wells can be fixed before you buy them, but you need to find out if they have these contaminants. Another caveat are houses that have septic systems. Over 20 years in service, these systems can fail. You want to do a percolation test to see if it's working properly. You want to make sure that it's compliant with regulations for tank size versus the number of bedrooms in the house. It doesn't go by bathrooms, it goes by bedrooms. One thing you need to know is that most towns require a replacement of your system or an upgrade at sale to meet code. So the seller is responsible for that, and you want to make sure that's done and that doesn't fall on your shoulders. You also want to make sure there's not a lot of damage and presence of termites, carpenter ants, or other vermin. You can hire an exterminator and have them check for it. If there's wood and rot damage, that's going to be expensive to repair. There's also other vermin. You have rodents and you have other wildlife. You could have a nest of any types of animals in your fireplace. You want to check for these things before you buy. So let's say we've done all that. It looks good. We found the right property. So we want to ask some important questions, and we're going to be spending time on the answers to these questions. What does it cost to renovate? We have to formulate a budget. Where will I get the money? We have to obtain the funding. Who's going to do the construction? We've got to hire the right contractor. And at what sale price will we earn a profit? That's our marketing strategy, and we need to look into that as well. The first thing we need to consider is not to overbuild. Remember, we talked about a white elephant. We want to make improvements that are similar in size and scope to that of our neighbors. We don't want to build something twice as big, twice as expensive, and then it won't sell. If you are going to flip the property as opposed to living in it, you want to aim for a middle style rather than the highest end equipment, unless you are doing this in a very expensive area. Then you want to go for the high end. That's your catering to your market. You want to use popular colors and styles, which tend to be neutral. And you also want to make sure that the price that you have to sell it at doesn't exceed the average of all the comparables that you'll be looking into. The next thing is to determine the construction costs. I'm giving some ballpark numbers here based on our experience. My husband and I have renovated 14 different properties over the last several decades. These are more current numbers. Flooring can cost $10 to $20 a square foot. Kitchens can vary extremely widely. You can do a very inexpensive kitchen renovation with standard size cabinets, off the shelf cabinets, $20,000, $60,000 would be a very high end kitchen renovation. I've seen ones that can go up to 100,000, but that would not be something you would do for a flip. Bathrooms, 5 to 20,000. If you have to replace HVAC or do a lot of duct work, that could be costly, 5 to 10,000. In some cases, you may have to upgrade the electrical supply and put in a new panel to accommodate all your new features and appliances. That could also be 5 to 10,000, and the same ballpark for some plumbing changes. Best thing to do is a walkthrough with contractors. You want to have them take 2 or 3 different contractors, go through it, get an estimate. Here in the Northeast, especially in the New Jersey area, you can find that a renovation could cost $100 to $150 a square foot. And if you're doing a high-end reno in a more expensive area, it can be upwards of $200 a square foot. So these are some good budgetary numbers for you. Next, you want to look at the cost of materials. Start thinking about vendors and suppliers for your big ticket items. You're going to have flooring and tile, kitchen cabinets and countertops, bathroom vanities, plumbing fixtures, and lighting. If you buy in bulk, meaning you're going to buy all of the materials, all the tile for the entire apartment or house at the same time, you can get bulk savings as opposed to doing it piecemeal. And it's very important to identify the long lead items, because those are the things that are going to take the longest to get. You want to order them the earliest. Once you've got the cost of materials and the cost of construction labor down, you can start to finalize your budget. You've got to think about the closing costs on the purchase. There's a transfer tax, there's title insurance, you've got to prepay some property tax. If you're buying a condo, you've got homeowner association fees and legal expenses. And this can take up to $10,000 to $20,000 for closing costs. So you want to put that into your budget. You also want to put in the carrying costs for financing. If you're going to get a mortgage and it's going to take you 6 months to do construction, you have to pay that mortgage, the interest on that mortgage. And you want to take that into consideration in preparing your budget. If the walls could talk, and I wish they could, they would tell you to add 10% contingency for unforeseen conditions. When you open up walls during demo, you're going to find things you did not expect. You may have to reroute ducts and conduit and plumbing to make an open concept. If you're taking out some walls, this is what you might find, like you're shown in the picture, what you might find inside them. There also might be some hidden damage to subfloors and walls that you have to repair, and you'll find during demo. Over time, material costs can increase. You can have delays. And last but not least, you can have a host of permit and inspection issues that cause delays and extra money. So you've got to add these things into your budget contingency, and you probably will use up that contingency. So having done the budget, you're now ready for a go, no-go decision. Are there any flags, red flags or fatal flaws? Let's hope not. Do you have the money? We'll talk some more about how to get that money in a few minutes. You want to be looking at recent sales of the comparable properties. What's the schedule going to be like? How long is this going to take? What's the potential for a cost increase? And so you ask yourself, will I make a worthwhile profit from buying this property and flipping it? And a worthwhile profit should be 15% or more. If it's less, it may not be worthwhile. So if it's a go, here's what we need to do. First, we need to secure the funding, purchase the property. We need to prepare plans and specifications, select a contractor, get the permits, procure the materials. And I do want to point out that COVID has caused a lot of supply chain delays. Delays in getting the materials from the manufacturer. If it's overseas, like some appliances, I ordered a Bosch wall oven for a recent renovation during COVID, and it took 7.5 months for that oven to get here. I was told it was on a container ship, then the ship didn't unload properly, then no truck drivers. So you got to put this into your time frame. Funding, very critical. We need to secure sufficient money to do the purchase and the construction and the carrying costs. One thing you should know is for an investment property where you're not going to be living in it, you will need to show 30% as a deposit, 30% coming from your own resources. A bank will only give you a 70% loan to value for a purchase where you're not going to be living in it. And another thing you should know is that the FHA does not provide loans for investors, only for people who plan on living in it. So that is not a funding source for you. You will need to show a source of these 30% funds. The bank will ask you to trace where those funds came from. What is a bank going to want in order to make you this loan? Well, it's pretty simple. They want to be sure they're going to be paid back. So they're looking for borrowers who have a good credit score, pretty much above 700. That you also don't have any history of delinquencies, clean credit, no bankruptcies. Very important that your debt to income ratio be less than 50%. And that you can demonstrate where these 30% funds came from. Last but not least, they want proof of ability to pay the debt service, meaning the monthly payments while you're doing the construction. And in order to do this, they're going to verify your income. They're going to ask you for asset and debts. They're going to ask you to project the profit from the sale of the property to make sure it's a worthwhile investment, not just for you, but for them. They want to see that you have some experience on similar projects and that you know what you're doing. And different banks have different underwriting standards, and some of them can be very onerous. So here's some funding strategies. Before you start looking at properties, you should establish relationships with banks, more than one bank, to be flexible. Get pre-qualified, know how much of a loan you are able to get so that you can get a quick approval when you do find the right property and you can act quickly. You can borrow against equity in other properties, taking out a home equity line of credit on a property that you own, and you can then use those funds to purchase another property. You can have your family members help with contribution to your 30% down payment. And you can also find other investors to work with you, especially at the beginning. This might be a very good strategy for you in getting started. Now that we've talked about the money, let's talk about the materials. Materials can be about 50% of the total cost of a project. If they are much less than 50%, you're paying too much for labor. If they're much more than that, you may be making too high an end purchases for a flip. So you want to determine what you're going to buy versus the contractor, because most contractors want contracts in which they buy the materials. They mark it up 10 to 20%. If you can do this yourself, you will save a lot of money. Another thing you should know is in New Jersey and in many states, Florida is another state, New York's another state I know about, there's no sales tax on a capital improvement if a contractor is manufacturing and installing an item. So for example, countertops. They buy the fabricator buys the slab, measures, makes the countertop and installs it. That would be an example of a capital improvement. Another would be a surround for a shower enclosure. So for anything like that, you do not have to pay the sales tax. Coordinating your purchases is critical. You want to make sure that you coordinate them with your construction schedule so they're there on time, but not too early. You want to look at the long lead customized items first. Your appliances, as I said, they're taking a very long time to get now due to COVID. Kitchen cabinets, slabs for countertops, these are typically your long lead items. Things like sinks and faucets and lighting fixtures are not long lead items. You want to prioritize all your materials to arrive when needed. If not, you're going to have to get some special storage, and that's costly. And you want to, if you're working with a condo, they typically have restraints as to when you can have deliveries. Service elevators are needed, truck bays are needed, insurance certificates are needed. So you want to make sure you take that into consideration. Selecting a contractor is the most critical step. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this because this is something I want to stress. The key criteria in selecting a contractor is, number one, they are local to the area. They know the building department inspectors, they know the town's requirements, very critical. If you start bringing in contractors from other areas, they're going to be clueless as to your specific needs, and that's going to cost you extra time and money. You also want to see that they have a portfolio of successful projects that they've done and that you can check their references to make sure that people were happy with their work. You also want to make sure that they're available for their desired time frame. You don't want to get a contractor that's overbooked and is not going to spend the amount of time on the job that you need, that they have enough staffing, they're not spread too thin. And you talk to them about it and ask them what other jobs they're doing and where they're doing them. And you also want a contractor who's going to agree with your terms and conditions. One thing we mentioned about who's going to buy the materials, but there are other things. Maybe you're going to bring in other contractors to do work like an HVAC contractor or an electrician. What is that split? And you want to agree on when the work's going to start and how long it's going to take. And of course, the most important thing is cost. But please, please watch out for lowball. If you get 3 contractors and 2 of them are in the same ballpark and one is half the price, don't take that lowball contractor. We did this one time when we were desperate. We were selling our property and we had to get the septic system brought up to code at the last minute. And we had a contractor who was much cheaper than everyone else. And it turned out he really didn't have the right experience. This was kind of early on in our renovating career. And it was a big mistake. We ended up having to stop work, get another contractor and pay a lot more money. So watch out for those low balls. Next, we have to write a construction contract. So here's what every contract must have. It's got to have a crystal clear scope of work. Who is doing what? The roles and responsibilities of you and roles and responsibilities of the contractor. A schedule for start and schedule for completion. The compensation, what you're going to be paying and when. And any terms and conditions that you want to include, like what would happen if if there was a weather delay, or what would happen if the contractor walked off the job. Get the contract in writing. In it, you will write a room by room scope of work. Again, defining who's doing what, identifying what materials you are providing and what materials the contractor is providing, the start and stop dates, progress payments. You don't want to be paying all the money up front, and the contractor is going to want to have enough money to be able to pay his staff and also for whatever materials he has to purchase. So you want to time these payments to the various tasks that the contractor will be completing. At the very end, you want to withhold what we call retainage for punch list work. You don't want to give the contractor the last of the money until all the work is done and things that you need fixed after you have seen the finished product. And you also want to make sure that there's terms and conditions, who's about debris, who's going to take it away in a dumpster, how they're going to protect the property, defaults, delays, walking off the job, that type of thing. So how do we keep the project on track during construction? Well, first of all, we start with a kickoff meeting with the contractor at the site. Identify the impediments, hazards. What are you going to do about unforeseen conditions? Once you have demolished some of the walls and looked inside, you will know more about what these conditions are. You want to make frequent visits to the site throughout the construction time. You want to check on the progress, correct any errors, and ensure that the quality is what you have expected. You can use FaceTime or WhatsApp, where the contractor can actually show you in live what's happening, and you can comment on it and when you're not present to see the work. We've used that on many occasions. It's very effective. You want to keep careful records of all your expenditures, your materials and your labor. Track the costs against your budget. Address variances. If you're spending more than you thought, why is that? What can you do to recover and control the costs? You may need to obtain additional funding. if there's problems and change orders during the work. Now, sometimes you may make a change order because you decide, oh, you know, I really want to raise that ceiling. I know that's going to cost extra money. And that's something you want to think about when you do your budget, that there might be these change orders. This is what we call an S curve. What you see here, you have a curve that is the expected way that the project is going to go. Sometimes a project can start off slow, less than expected, and then at some point you'll catch up and you'll reach the end point at the same time you thought you would. Sometimes it'll start faster and then drag toward the end. This can be true of schedule, and this can be true of costs. This curve applies to both. So what you want to do is make sure you're tracking everything so that you can recover when you're falling behind. Delays. You're certainly going to experience some delays. Delays affect your carrying charges, and time is definitely money. Things that can cause delays are permits and inspections. Inspectors don't always show up when you want them to. Sometimes you can't do any further work until they do. We talked about unforeseen conditions that you find in the wall. You might find this extra damage. Site drainage. It could be a storm and all of a sudden you see there are huge puddles against the side of the house and that you need to improve some drainage in the yard, which you didn't expect. There could be complaints from neighbors due to dust and debris and noise, and you have to deal with that, and that can cause delays. They can ask the town to do a stop work on you. Weather delays, and also equipment and delivery delays, and that's definitely something to expect during COVID. We don't want surprises. These delays are going to happen. So really, when you budget, you include these contingencies and you prepare for them. My famous expression is failing to plan is planning to fail. Finishing the job. So as the work is completed, we want to do a very thorough walkthrough with the contractor. We want to make a punch list of the remaining work, test everything out, open everything up, make sure everything is working properly, and make this list of things that you want the contractor to do. Put little marks on areas, put blue tape or some way of showing the contractor where these items are, these flaws. Maybe it's something on the walls and the paint, maybe it's a piece of equipment or something that's not flushing properly. Make sure the contractor knows what these are and set a timetable for completing the punch list. I put in red the next two items because they're very, very important. Before you make all the payments to the contractor, make sure all the inspections are signed off. Get the documented evidence of it. These can haunt you if it's not done. And don't release the final payment until you're satisfied that the punch list is complete and the permits are closed out. Now that you have a beautiful finished product, let's get it sold. So one thing that buyers don't like to see, most buyers that is an empty vacant space. You might want to stage the property to attract buyers. You can hire a staging company. They bring equipment in. You're renting it essentially. They will come in and make each room look lovely and show the buyers what the room could be used for and how it would look. And this can entice buyers to buy. You can mow the lawn, clean up the exterior, make sure all the construction debris outside the house is gone, clean it up. Next, you would meet with real estate brokers and determine the optimal list price. Brokers will have suggestions for you as to things that might enhance it, that might take very little time and money to do. And then what you're going to do is select the broker and list the property for sale. So selecting a realtor is important. You want to pick a realtor that's local to the area, that really has their finger on the pulse. What's the market doing? You want a broker that has a successful track record of recent sales on properties in the area. Highlight that, in the area. Then they will have a more realistic knowledge and be able to help you better. You want to hear what their marketing plan is. It's mostly online, but also some paper advertisements are done. What kind of open houses do they plan to have? How do they network? How do they get other brokers interested in the property? But most important, that they have a realistic list price to sell quickly at a profit. So you get brokers, 3 brokers, 4 brokers, you'll have a high and a low, and you'll have some in the middle. It's more likely that you're going to want to use one of the ones in the middle. The one that's high, you're going to end up waiting to sell, and you're going to have to reduce your price several times. The one that's low is setting it too low because they want to sell it really, really fast, and probably somewhere in the middle is where you want to be. As you've listed it and people are coming to see the house, you want to solicit feedback from buyers. The brokers will be able to help you with this. They'll tell you what people liked, and they'll also tell you what people didn't like. You can adjust the list price downward to expedite the sale, and you want to aim to be on the market less than 30 days. Otherwise, you've got those carrying costs that you have to worry about. So it may be worthwhile to reduce the price a little bit so that you can get it sold quickly. Then you close on the sale, and hopefully you enjoy the profits. So what's next after that? Well, as they say on TV, look for the next property to flip. But here you're at an advantage. You can apply the lessons that you've learned. You can use the profits so that you don't need as much financing, or maybe no financing at all. If you like the contractors and the vendors, you can use them again. And guess what? They may give you discounts for giving them a chance the second time around. As you do this, you'll build your portfolio. Banks will be more interested in giving you financing if you need it. And you will get a good reputation with the contractors and vendors, and things will get easier as you go along. And after a couple of successful jobs, you'll probably be ready to do a couple of projects at a time, but don't rush into that. Again, let me give you a couple of warnings. I think you've learned from this seminar. Flipping houses is not for novices. It's very, very hard to get into and to be good at it the first time around. You really do need to have a basic knowledge of construction, of how to appraise the value of a house and pick the right house or property. And you need that knowledge of contract law. You also need solid financing, some personal funds, and the ability to get funds from a bank to get pre-qualified for it, and to be flexible during construction if you do need more money. One thing you really need to remember is that no construction project goes as planned. You have to deal with stress and frustration, and I guarantee you that will happen. Hopefully, the rewards will negate that. So how do we get there from here? We're starting out. First thing is just get a realtor. Get to understand the property values in your geographic area of interest and start to work close to home. Though you're going to be most familiar with your general geographic area, start there. Next thing to do is get your credit in as good shape as possible. Pay off debts, improve your credit score. You really want to be above 700 in order to get good financing at the lowest possible rate. Save for that 30% down payment. Establish relationships with banks, contractors, and vendors in advance of buying anything. Find out who you're going to be working with. And to get started, you may want to partner with a professional as an investor. And try this on a couple of occasions. Do a couple of projects with someone who knows what they're doing. Make a small profit, and then you'd be more able to go on your own. So hopefully I've covered the material that you need as the basics. There's really a lot more toward this. I wish we had a 4-hour seminar, but I'm very happy to answer any questions, and you can also contact me at my email address if you would like to go into anything in more detail.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was great. As you were talking, the sun seems to have come out behind me, so I apologize for the glow behind me. If we have any questions, please go ahead and post them. We do have one here, which is on slide 25. You mentioned borrower history, and what if you have no history, or if this is your first project? Do you have any suggestions or comments on that, Sue?
Yes, so it's better if you do have a history, but you can be a first-time borrower if you have good credit score and you do have the financial resources. This is what I was stressing about, to create relationships with banks before you purchase your first property. Find out which banks are willing to make loans to you and how much are you qualified for. Then you can set the stage for what properties you should be aiming at.
Excellent, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? We don't have any other posts. Oh, here's one. Do you suggest engaging candidate contractors for relatively small projects, perhaps on your own house, before inviting them to bid on a house to flip?
Oh, well, certainly. It's always best to get the experience you need for this from your own properties. That's how we got started in it. We renovated several that we lived in while we were living in them. Then we renovated several that we were buying and going to live in, and then we started to do more on the flipping side. So yes, that is absolutely the best way. And once you get a contractor that's good, that would be one that you would stick with. But it's also good to get a repertoire of 2 or 3 contractors, because they may not always be available when you need them.
And do you generally check references on contractors, etc., before you start? Always
check references, and you want to make sure they're real references too, and they're not cousin or brother-in-law. But you want to ask a lot of very pointed questions of that reference and make sure you understand the kind of work that they did and how happy they were, and ask where they weren't happy. What didn't turn out as well as you expected. You'll find out a lot by asking those type of questions.
And do you ever ask for like photos or anything like that?
So, you know what, I just did this recently for a property we purchased and hired a contractor for, and that person actually did a tour using one of the video chat methods, so I could see their house, and they did send me some pictures too. So yes, that's certainly take advantage of all of our technology for sure.
Then there's a question, do you think now is a good time to start, if just with property prices being so high, etc.?
Yes, but I wouldn't start at the top. I would start with a very distressed property. That we just bought one that was a distressed property, and it didn't have this 25% COVID bump. So to start looking for ones that I would pick ones where the seller is distressed, it's been on the market a long time, it's an ugly duckling, people really don't want to take this kind of a project on. That's where I would start.
Okay. How do you find investment partners, like people who may want to invest in projects like this with you?
Oh gosh, it's been a long time. I don't think we've had an investor working with us. But it's word of mouth. I mean, you'll hear at social gatherings of people who are doing this. Maybe somebody in your family knows someone who's doing it or is doing it. And to just say, gee, you know, could I partner with you, either put a little bit of my own money into it, or even just shadow you to see how you're doing it and learn from that person.
To answer, yes, we will send a copy of the PowerPoint after this. Well, within a day or so of this, we'll send a copy of the PowerPoint. Have you got any tips to help identify candidate properties, looking for those with mostly cosmetic upgrades?
Yes. So start with a broker in your area. Make a relationship with a broker and tell the broker what you're interested in, and have the broker start to identify such properties for you. You can also do your own online search. Let's say you pick a town, you go to Zillow, you look for properties in that town, and what you'll start to see properties all of a certain price range, and then here's 1 or 2 that are much lower, and they look like they're the same size, and they look like they have the same amount of land. then click on the pictures and maybe you'll see why. Maybe you'll see that it needs a lot of work and a lot of renovation. That's how we find the properties that we want to invest in, is that they really they stand out from their peers in that they're the same size, they're maybe in the same building, but they're in much worse shape, and therefore their price is cheaper. So you can do a lot of work on your own, but also engage a real estate broker to help you.
And what happens with the property taxes? So say you've bought somewhere, now you've invested in it, you've renovated it, so you've increased the value. Is that something you have to consider in your costing when you're doing your budget for it?
Only if you're going to hold on to it for a while. Fortunately for you, if you sell it, it's the buyer who is going to have to pay the higher cost of the real estate taxes. And as a buyer, I would always be asking about that and taking a look at what the rate would be, what will my burden be. But if you're a flipper, once you sell it, it's the buyer that has to pay the increased taxes. If you can't sell it and you're going to be holding on to it for 6 months or so, then yes, you will have to pay those extra taxes, but just for that period of time. So it should be relatively minor. It takes a while for the tax assessor to catch up with a renovated property. Sometimes you won't see an increase for well over a year.
And is it worth looking at places where maybe there's tax abatements on renovations and new builds and places like that? Is that something to consider in your...
Yes, absolutely. That's pretty hard to find. Where you might find it is in an area of urban renewal, where there are going to be tax credits or abatements, and you can work with the town on that. But again, that's only if you're going to hold the property and live in it.
Right. It doesn't give it a higher resale value if you have a place that has a tax abatement.
It could.
Okay.
At a higher resale value. That's a pretty rare situation where you're going to find that. That's not something that we've encountered a lot of.
Okay. And then we have how do you find properties to buy, which I think you kind of answered, but maybe just recap that. Just a quick recap. Again, look for distressed properties that stand out because they're much cheaper than their peers, properties with long days on market, properties that are pending foreclosures, and that have also look at this list pendants list. You can Google that online and get lists of properties in your area that have been announced as future foreclosures and short sales. Okay. Any tips to properly sell the renovated property to avoid the buyer coming back with lawsuits, etc., after the sale?
Well, you need to check out the construction yourself. You want to make sure that everything is done right, and you don't let the contractor off the hook if there's anything that you think might be subject to a future lawsuit. So you're taking that burden on by when you close out the project. Only way there could be a lawsuit is if there is something you've lied about in selling the property. So you have to be very, very careful that you disclose everything up front to a buyer. And you're not offering any warranties. So once the buyer buys it, it's really the buyer owns it.
Can you just repeat the website for the foreclosures?
I don't really have a specific website. They're really very specific to your local area, but you can Google foreclosures and lists will come up. You can Google lists pendants and lists will come up. They vary from state to state, from county to county. I don't really have any specific sites to recommend.
Okay. And then do you need to read anything or go to seminars to get started, or just mostly getting out there and finding a realtor and staying within properties in your area?
Depends on your own personal skills and abilities. If you have a good understanding of construction and you have a good understanding of real estate, then yes, you can start to go out on your own. But for sure, I would always recommend that you get more training. And I would shadow some investors. I would attend other seminars and get as much information as you can so that you avoid the various pitfalls we talked about.
Do you have a rough idea of what the staging costs are on average?
Sure. Depends on the size of the house. Probably $3,000 to $5,000 if you're going to stage it for a couple of months. You want to be under that couple of months. After that, it's going to start to get expensive, but depends on, obviously, if you're staging a 3,000 square foot property, it's going to cost a different amount than if you're staging a 1,500 square foot property. But I would put aside $5,000 for staging.
Okay. Where do you find staging companies?
Oh, again, just Google it for your area. They're going to vary from town to town. Just Google it. There's tons of them available. Many real estate brokers can give you recommendations for that too, because they're the ones that usually end up helping their clients stage. If they get a client who wants to sell a house and the house is in pretty bad shape, they'll tell the client, get rid of all your furniture. We'll stage it for you and get it sold quickly. So they may also be a very good source of information on staging companies.
A bank's a good source of potential flippable houses, like banks that I guess with short sales and things like that.
Yes, and yes, you can approach banks about that. You have to be very, very careful because they may not be in the best of structural shape. But yes, they do have lists of houses they're trying to sell. Many of them are sold through brokers. You'll find most of those foreclosures, short sale list pendants through brokers as well. So they're pretty well published.
And I think even on Zillow, I'm not sure, but either Zillow or Realtor.com, you can actually filter by short sale, I think, or something. You
can filter by a lot of different ways. You can ask for short sales, yes, and you can ask for foreclosures on Zillow. And Trulia, who merged with Zillow, the same thing.
And I think this is probably the $1 million question, but based on your past experience, what is the average profit on flips?
Okay, so I would not do a flip if I wasn't going to get more than 15%. I try to make 25% on a flip. Again, over time, you'll make more. The first ones you'll do, there'll be some mistakes and there'll be some things, costs you didn't expect. And so you'll be down toward might even find one around 10%, which is fine as a first attempt, but I would aim to be between 15 and 20%.
Okay, well, I knew it was only a matter of time before the dog started barking. Can you please describe a short sale for real estate?
Okay, so a short sale is where someone is in over their head. So maybe they bought a property at a high price, and like there was the banking issue back in 2008, or what happened right after COVID when the market crashed. And so property values have come down at a certain point, and they may have a mortgage that's worth more than what the property's current market value is. So that seller might want to negotiate with their bank as to do a short sale, where the bank, instead of accepting the total mortgage value left, will accept something less than that amount. And so they can now sell the property at the new lower market value, and get out of their mortgage. And so they become a very anxious seller and very motivated seller. That's a short sale. Short sales are hard to work with because the bank is going to determine the price that the seller can sell it at. So not only are you working with a seller, you're now working with the seller's bank. They tend to take a lot longer to close on something like that, but they can be very worthwhile.
Okay, do we have any other questions out there? I think we have answered all the questions, so I'm going to start to wrap up. We have a couple more minutes, so if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to fire them in now, and I'll just do my sort of wrap up spiel in the meanwhile. So thank you, everybody, so much for joining. I hope it was useful to you. I know it was great. It was fascinating. It's a great topic. And we were lucky to have Sue, who has a wealth of knowledge on this. So thank you, Sue, very, very much.
Very welcome. My pleasure.
To answer the questions, there are going to be, the presentation is going to be emailed out to everybody at some point in the next couple of days. And the webinar will be put on our YouTube channel as well, and on our Facebook page. once it gets onto our YouTube channel. So yes, there will be recordings of it that'll be available to everybody. Just a quick comment on SCORE. We represent SCORE Monmouth. SCORE is actually a national entity, and we are powered by the SBA. We are all volunteers here at SCORE, and we are here for the life of your business. So if you know anybody who is looking for a mentor or somebody to help them in the running of their business, or any questions they have in it, or if you know anybody who would like to be a mentor and help small businesses, please check out our website at monmouth.score.org. We have a number of other webinars coming up over the next few weeks. And we're always posting more webinars. So if you just keep an eye out there, and if you're on our mailing list, you'll get the emails about them as well. But we have a variety of different topics and a variety of different speakers. So keep an eye on that too. And I think that's everything. Again, Sue, thank you so very much. Do you have anything you wanted to just wrap up with?
No, not really. Just take your time. Don't jump in with both feet until you know what you're doing.
Excellent. Sound advice. All right, then I'm going to end the meeting. And again, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you on the next one.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.